got until 10 minutes after noon.
Sorry.
Is that right? And it's good to see everyone this morning after such a productive night last night.
Yes.
And I want to thank you all for being here as we talk about public policy and some updates for you all here in Wisconsin. I know kind of most of you just from attending Wisconsin community media meetings over the course of the last 16 years. It seems kind of crazy to say that. First as a son of Stoughton. So I was born at Stoughton General, and a graduate of first grade in Putnam Heights in Eau Claire, and Sherman, now Malcolm X Elementary here in Madison, and also as a Minnesotan. So thank you so much for your kind, warm hatred of the Vikings. But it's great to see you all again. I'm based in Washington, D.C. now, working with the Alliance for Community Media. My colleague Mike Bradley is based in the East Metro of Minneapolis-St. Paul, but he has had the pleasure of working with a number of you and also with local municipalities and community media organizations across the country, and he is known for being my former lawyer.
Yes.
Because he actually
Before
represented.
he became really famous and went out to Washington, D.C.
Yeah, so he actually represented my organization, St. Paul Neighborhood Network, when I was the executive director there for about 13 years. So we've had some experience working together on things.
Yes.
Yes. Both in terms of advocacy as well as legal analysis. So Mike has put together some materials that we're going to share with you. We've got a copy of them that you should be able to take as well. We're going to go through this, and we'll be providing commentary on each of the items that Mike has put forward. And I think if you've got questions along the way, please raise your hand and stop us. Because I think if we're not careful, we have the ability to be sort of like downhill speakers and sort of accelerate. So
We
please,
could just keep going and going and going.
So it's a little bit like an accordion. We can expand or contract at various points along the way. If you want us to slow down, go over a point, clarify something along the way, please let us know. And we won't wait till the end. All right? So we want you to speak up during the course of the next 35 minutes or so, and then we'll repeat the question for the camera as well, since we're recording this here today.
Yeah, this is a small group, so please, raise your hand, and we want to talk about what you want to talk about.
So Mike, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Okay, well, let's go. In our presentation this morning, we wanted to for sure go over kind of three main topics. And for us, or for me, I guess, it's kind of fun when there's new cable cases out there. And there's two new cable cases, so that's exciting for me as a cable lawyer. And so we'll go over those. Another thing that's associated with one of the cases is new legislation that was passed in a state. And that was part of the litigation, and it was completely uphill. I gave the secret away. But that's really exciting, and we want to talk about that legislation and kind of what was behind the legislation and what made it successful. And can we use models like that moving forward for other states like Wisconsin? But we're going to start off with over the top. And so there's a lot of questions out there about, can we franchise over-the-top services? And does everybody, when I say over-the-top, does everybody know what that means? I know I was talking to, I think it was you actually, that we were talking about over-the-top, and that was new. And so when you're new to the industry, we use these abbreviations, and they don't necessarily make sense. But OTT, over-the-top, refers to all those streaming services that are delivered right through an internet service provider. So it rides the internet to your home, which is what over the top is referring to. So I think there's been a lot of hope out there that states, cities would be able to franchise over-the-top services, and let's talk about maybe why that is. So our first bullet there is, what's the impact of over-the-top on franchise and PEG funding? And it won't be surprising, it's negative, right? Over-the-top services are causing people to cut the cord, which results in less cable subscribers.
And
Is that there's this decline, and it's not like this, right? It's kind of a slow decline, but it's becoming significant as we go year by year. It's compounding, right? Going down. Yeah.
You said interrupt, so I guess.
Yes, interrupt.
When you say you should be tracking that information, are you talking about tracking how many people in your community subscribe to streaming services? Because I don't know how you would track that.
No.
Or you're talking about tracking.
Follow the money.
Okay.
Yes.
The TDS and charter won't tell us.
Can
how
I
many.
just be fair that whatever you're saying is probably not going to be very well.
so you're saying you can't get the information about subscriber levels from TDS or charter because of the state franchise.
They're just not sharing that information. So I mean, we know what we're getting for franchise fees, obviously.
Does the state collect that information? Because in other state franchising states, there's a state office of revenue that will get that information and then index it. So I think that's probably the other avenue that could be taking because there has to be some type of
The Department of Financial
Right.
Institutions, they have to file an annual report with that.
So Mary is saying that the Department of Annual Financial Institutions files that report annually. So I think, yeah, TDS and Charter will give that you directly, but the question I would have is whether or not you can get that indirectly from the state agency. In Massachusetts, that's actually how many of the smaller organizations find out what their subscriber levels look like.
But that's not a broken down number, that's like.
An aggregate number, yeah. Well, yeah.
And I'm not overly concerned about those particular numbers, getting those numbers from Charter and TDS. What I'm really talking about are, what are your franchise fees looking like? Okay. So that you have complete control over. And then you can chart it out, showing year by year what's going on. Because ultimately, if you're wanting to talk to decision makers about franchise fees and the importance of maintaining franchise fees and not getting nicked another 0.5% or 1%, or increasing it to where it should be, right? You need to have that data handy to you.
And the other thing I'd suggest is that if you need to get a better sense of what the delivery systems look like in your community, it's probably incumbent upon you to figure that out, right? So knowing in Sun Prairie, how many people are using cable, how many people have broadband, how many people are just using the cell phones, how many people have nothing. That's like good market data for you to know, but the cable company's not going to tell you that. That's almost something that you have to derive yourself, probably even through polling. And that's not that hard to do, but it's useful to know because you want to be able to reach as many people as possible with your programming and services. So understanding how people are using media and communications is vital. So you've got the skills, Jeff. I know you do.
Thanks for your support.
So there's been litigation in several states. So I listed out about 9 states, right, that are doing litigation to require franchise fees on over-the-top services. And so they're alleging these companies either need to get a franchise or they need to pay franchise fees. Okay. So this is my illustration of how successful that's being. It's not successful. So far, the cases have generally failed, and I'm not going to go into all the reasons why. I just know that they failed, and we're sad like that. I don't even know what that is.
That's a red panda.
Is that right?
That's a red panda, my friend.
Okay. Well, we're like the red panda right now. We're sad, and we're sitting on a tree branch.
We're a Chinese import that is sleeping during the daytime. All right, go ahead.
So, we wanted to talk about kind of the projected success of over-the-top franchise fees on over-the-top services. And I think we probably both agree it's not likely to be successful unless there's a change in the law. In my view, I was telling Mike and Mary that I had a law partner that used to say it's all about the dirt when it comes to regulating companies in the right of way. And what that means is there's a wire in the dirt that belongs to a company. And so the wire in the dirt belongs to Charter, it belongs to TDS, those kind of companies. Netflix, Hulu, they operate over the line, but they don't own the line in the dirt.
So, and just to kind of, and really the key here is a franchise fee goes back to your place and location and the relationship you've got to locality. I think that there are some successful taxation strategies that are coming forward,
Correct.
but that's not a franchise fee.
No.
Just to be clear about this. So, for example, in the state of Maryland, they just enacted an online sales tax to support education, and it's going to probably generate $150 million a year to support education. And it's a Netflix tax. It's an online entertainment tax. It has nothing to do with the public right-of-way. It has to do with the provision of entertainment services. And I think this is sort of the gap that a lot of people just can't figure out. Is like, you want to be able to invest in local production, invest in locality, invest in management of local rights of way. The franchise fee mechanism, I don't think, will not work with these types of services. A sales tax certainly could, but then you have to find a way to convince a government to be able to provide it back locally through general revenue. And that's been a problem in states like Connecticut and North Carolina, where they've enacted these taxes on satellite and cable. Goes into the general revenue, and then sometimes it trickles down to localities, sometimes it doesn't. So this is sort of just a structural problem with this issue. I'm seeing a bunch of hands pop up. Jason and then Mary, go ahead.
Have there been any municipalities that have enacted a tax? And if there have been, are they able to set that aside and say, hey, this is how we're going to fund our cable access channel?
Yeah, that would be great, right?
I know.
The issue is that the city has to have authority by state law to put that tax into
And
place.
they don't have that.
State by state.
Yeah, right.
It's state by state. So, for example, City of Chicago enacted a Netflix tax. Basically, went into the general revenues. It's not set aside.
Wisconsin have the ability for cities to do that?
I don't know. I don't think so. Mary, you had your hand up. Huh?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something that Mike was talking about earlier, which was it would require a change in the law. And I just wanted to clarify, aren't we talking about federal law change here because of the way federal law is structured, that we can franchise cable companies on the cable side of the business, but we have to stay away from the broadband side because it's an information service, and so that's why it doesn't fall under our franchise?
Yeah. So yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, so using the franchising strategy, that's a Title VI service under the Communication Act, and all of those services are not seen as Title VI services under federal law, and that's going to be the problem again and again and again. And this is question of whether or not a Netflix or a Hulu is controlling the ground, controlling the pipe in or not. So a Comcast is controlling the pipe.
Correct.
Netflix is not controlling the pipe. If Comcast bought Netflix, then there'd be a different discussion to be had, right? So, but
But if you're talking about a sales tax, Mary,
Yeah.
you're talking about a state law.
yeah,
That's a state law.
that's a state
And
law.
then how does the city of Chicago get away with taxing Netflix?
They're allowed under Illinois state law to have that entertainment tax. So again, it's state by state defines how sales taxes work or don't work, and that's going to get to this next case in a moment. Actually, that Mike's going to reference with City of Eugene versus FCC. So nice segue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well done, Mike. So, yes. So, City of Eugene versus FCC. Have any of you heard of this case? So, one person, two, three.
Thank you for your membership.
Yes. So, Mike, maybe you could go over the third report in order that
Sure.
was the subject of the FCC.
So the FCC promulgated this third report and order in the summer of 2019. Actually, a number of Wisconsin municipalities were active in the rulemaking that occurred. The question really about the third report order is there were a series of conflicting legal opinions on earlier FCC orders about what the status of non-monetary compensation was. So, you know, in local franchising, there's a host of different benefits that communities have negotiated with historically over the years. Franchise fees are a monetary benefit. Unfortunately, the FCC began a series of rulemakings in the 2000s that started to say that you could claw back some of those fees based upon the monetary worth of the so-called in-kind benefits. Now, federal law doesn't actually define an in-kind benefit, and I use these hyphens because I think that in-kind benefits is like basically an administrative fiction that the cable industry, asked the FCC to create.
And
to
what
be
the heck
able
is
to,
an in-kind benefit? I don't get that.
What
is that?
An in-kind benefit typically is a free service that you get as gratis. I mean, so typically it's actually a donation that's given to a local charity. That's what an in-kind benefit is. I'm a lawyer. I provide my services in kind as I volunteer for my local church, for example, or my local synagogue. That's an in-kind benefit. Asking then to get monetary compensation for your in-kind benefit is not charity.
Correct.
Right, and it's not a free service. To say that you've been giving away a free service and then clawing back the money is a way basically to drain franchise fees, which was sort of the strategy, I think, all along for the cable industry. What the Pye Commission did in the course of the third report and order is they said that any type of free service that is negotiated for actually isn't negotiated for, actually, because we all know that local governments are not quite criminal syndicates, but they use their power to take advantage of corporations and terrorize them, and therefore
we hold these multi-billion-dollar corporations.
Right. Again, so we all know that the city of Sheboygan is holding these corporations hostage in order for them to make their money, and therefore basically any sort of free services that are provided. So, for example, senior discounts, cable boxes to schools, can be monetized, and then the compensation due for the use of rights of way can be reduced. And they opened the door in this proceeding to then basically saying that a whole host of things could be free services, even the very channels themselves, which are authorized under the Cable Act. Well, that's not a free service. That's actually what you're supposed to be providing. I mean, so that there's about a bunch of muddled thinking in the order.
But it was a really big deal, right? Because if for example, the line going from City Hall to your playback facility, if they're in different locations, and possibly even the channels, could be monetized at fair market value for the cable operator, and the cable operator could then reduce what it's paying in franchise fees by the amount of in-kind or non-cash cable requirements that are being provided under the cable franchise. So it was a really big deal, especially, I would say, that fair market value piece was huge, because I've been in places, more than one place actually, where there was a institutional network line or just a connection.
A fiber drop from a remote site, for example.
From A to B, and the cable operator was required by its cable franchise to provide that connection. Now, it could be a franchise, it could be by state law, right? So the cable operator was saying that connection, just that one, is valued, the fair market value of that is $1,600 per month. So it's $1,600 per month per location. Well, the client I was working with had 80 locations.
Right. So at that point, there's a disincentive to ask for channel for that connection capacity, and I think in the order itself, the FCC fell short of this, but they opened the door for further discussions about whether or not the value of the channels themselves could be counted against franchise fees, which in certain markets could mean basically you're given zero compensation for the use of public rights of way if you're using the channels at all. Now, they didn't do that in this order because they realized that there's no way to actually calculate that value on a fair basis that could withstand a court challenge. So they held off on the issue, and luckily Chairman Pai left office, as did Mike O'Reilly, who was I think one of the chief perpetrators of the idea that local governments are criminal syndicates shaking down corporations. But the issue still lingers now.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about there was two issues. So one was this franchise fee reduction, basically. And then the other piece was total preemption by the FCC of local governments on any non-cable services provided over the cable system. And they called that the mixed-use network, meaning that a cable system could provide multiple services and that local governments could only regulate cable service, and they were 100% preempted from regulating any non-cable services. And we all know what those non-cable services are, right? Internet services. Okay, so that was another really big deal.
The reason it's called the City of Eugene is that the state of Oregon actually allows for municipalities in Oregon to provide a telecommunications tax. So the case stems from Comcast challenging the City of Eugene on its ability to provide a 7% telecommunications tax, which all telecommunications providers pay. And Comcast says, well, we pay a 5% franchise fee, therefore we're exempt from the 7% telecommunication tax on our broadband. Because they want the business advantage over their competitors in terms of cost.
Correct.
They've lost the case twice in Oregon. In the Supreme Court, so they went forum shopping with the FCC, found commissioners that agreed with them, and then basically this case has now been argued in the Sixth Circuit Court in Ohio. A ruling came out in August, which basically was a success in some scores, disappointing in many other scores.
Yeah, and we disagree maybe a little bit on. I'm declaring more success than success.
I think successful in that we got the court to agree that the fair market value provision of in-kind services was not the appropriate way to calculate what any clawback of franchise fees could be. They actually agreed with our analysis that it should be the marginal cost because the burden is on the operator, and so that the operator has to prove what the sort of marginal cost would be for any free obligations. Because the court agreed with us that the company should not be basically making money off of their franchise, right? Because you could be inflating these fair market values for your free services and basically making money off of your cable franchise obligations, right?
Yeah, the court said the FCC got that completely wrong.
Right.
And ruled in the city's favor.
There's a deadline for appeal on this case with the Supreme Court that's November 1st. We don't know precisely what the cable industry will do. We have a much more favorable FCC right now. I don't think the FCC is going to challenge this rule, but I think NCTA will want to find a way to challenge it.
Can I just interrupt you?
Yeah.
So the court in the Sixth Circuit ruled it in the city's favor, which is great. On the non-cable services, mixed-use network, it completely ruled in our favor as far as regulating non-cable services. Because remember, the FCC said in this disastrous order that cities were completely preempted from regulating any non-cable services, 100%. And what the court ended up saying is, no, that's not true at all. We really agree with the cities that cities are not completely preempted. they can regulate or non-cable services provided over a cable system, so long as the regulation is consistent with the Cable Act. Now that's kind of where the rubber hits the road, and they said that this fee that Oregon cities were charging was contrary to the act, so they preempted the fee. Now we may see on November 1st that some local government jurisdictions may appeal that. That's
Right.
going to be their right to do on November 1st. The cable industry also has the right to appeal also on November 1st.
But we don't know, we will not know probably until, I think, the new year whether or not the case will be accepted by the Supreme Court.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
the Supreme
so
Court.
that's the next stage for this if this moves forward.
Yes,
Go ahead,
Mary.
Mary.
So, how did the court imagine cities would thread that needle if they are not allowed to assess a fee on the broadband side under Title VI, but the courts did not completely close the door? What's the crack, what's the opening there for cities? Is it the sales tax again? Is it?
It's a telecommunications tax, specifically in Oregon. I mean, so again, it's a local tax.
But
For-
in that case, it ultimately ruled against municipalities saying what they were trying to do really was assessing a franchise fee on broadband. Right?
Well, yeah, not exactly. What the Oregon cities were doing was there was a state law that allows Oregon cities to license non-cable services, specifically broadband internet services. So that's what the cities were doing, okay? And that was the fee that was affirmed on appeal to be preempted by the Cable Act, okay? So that may go to the Supreme Court, it may get reversed, but that's the law right now, okay? That cities are preempted from charging a franchise fee on internet services provided over a cable system. Now, you're introducing the other topic that we talked about earlier, and that's a state sales tax on like over-the-top services, and that's different.
Right.
That
So-
was not preempted.
No.
No.
No. So the entities, well, so the entities that we're talking about here typically are telecommunications providers. They're not OTT operators. So it would be like the Ma Bells, the various Baby Bells, and the like, that would have local services through an agreement with the local city. Now, in some states, that's simply prohibited from having, right? So, as opposed to the OTT tax that we're talking about, right?
I understand you're talking about lines. I
The-
guess I'm just trying to clarify.
the gap-
Another way you could do this, you know?
Oh, they weren't suggesting another way
No.
to charge a fee.
Oh, they were.
No,
No.
they were preempting the fee.
Okay.
But what the gap they left was, what other regulation can you have on non-cable services, on internet services
Right.
provided over a cable system?
Right.
And there is a gap there. And so you have to think about, okay, well, what does state law allow local governments to do, and what does federal law allow local governments to do? And what that case was saying, state and local governments can regulate those non-cable services to the extent that they're not preempted by the Federal Cable Act. The only thing that the court said that was preempted was this franchise fee-like charge to an operator that's providing internet
That
services.
keeps open a telecom fee.
No. No fees.
Yeah, I mean,
No
so
fees.
so
So
wait,
you're looking
what-
at customer service.
Right.
You're looking at build-out requirements. You might be looking at some technical standards. So you're looking at a lot of other things related to regulation of non-cable services. But the fee under the Cable Act is a no-go, as the
I
law
get that
stands
part.
right now.
I get that part.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
and
guess I was just thinking that the way you were talking about it sounded like the court was saying, well, cities and states have other powers that they could
the,
somehow regulate this broadband.
well, there.
And that's what I thought you were saying.
Wait for the appeal. So I mean, the City of Eugene will be making a cert petition on this to the Supreme Court, we can share the analysis when that occurs. But I expect to see that in the next
It'll be Monday.
By Monday.
It'll be Monday.
Yeah, Monday. Right.
It
That's
can't be
November
later
1st.
than Monday.
Right. So it actually might be coming out today. I don't know.
Yeah, and like Mike said, even if the case is appealed, you submit a petition for writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court then looks at it, and it can decide whether or not to take the case. So it may decide to not take the case,
Right.
and in that event, the case is over, and then we're left with the Sixth Circuit
Right.
decision.
I mean, I think the other thing I would say about this is that the victory on fair market value versus marginal cost on the in-kind provisions is significant. I think it puts a real gum in the works for the cable industry's plans to be able to claw back franchise fees, because it would mean that you'd actually have to show your homework rather than just kind of make up. Excuse me for saying this. You're recording this, the bullshit. That's a technical term. There is concern, though, that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that occurs from the industry, and I know that there's probably going to be reintroduction of the Protecting Community Television Act in Congress in the coming year because of just the confusion over a lot of this, frankly. The Protecting Community Television Act was introduced by Senator Markey and Representative Eshoo in Massachusetts and California, and it says specifically that a franchise fee is monetary in nature. So the entire sort of crazy mechanisms of in-kind benefits used to claw back obligations of corporations to local communities is dissolved, right?
And to me, that's just a bill going back to the status quo of how we dealt with franchise fees for 35 years.
Right. I mean, in no small part, it's because of the fact that the commission, I think, is a captured entity, and it's sort of created this apparatus over the course of a series of rulings now, dating back to 2007, that just basically don't serve any good purpose, really, in terms of regulating the marketplace.
But that decision, too, Mike, I think really shows the importance of state and local governments participating in
Yeah.
the rulemaking process.
Yeah.
Because if they didn't do that, we would be stuck with this fair market value, and there'd be loss of millions and millions of dollars.
And specifically for
franchise
organizations
fees.
like yours that participated in the rulemaking, this entire question of like the fair market value of a channel being used against your franchise fee. We basically, I mean, to your credit, ACM's credit, your clients as well, Mike, we all came together and said, no, this is not correct. This is a way to eliminate community television in America. So that really is sort of a success story that we have to remind ourselves.
Yeah, and what
of.
we didn't put in the slide, too, because it came up really after we put the slides together,
Yeah.
was that the Biden administration has now announced that they're going to name Commissioner Rosenworcel as chair and then nominate another FCC commissioner. So that's, I think, for our advocacy, particularly on the franchise fee and non-cable service issues, we think that's good news.
You will have commissioners who are friendly and actually want to listen to local governments and local channels. So I think the thing I would say to you is watch this space over the next 6 weeks. There's a short period of time for those commissioners to be appointed by the Senate. Senate needs to actually do its work. So there might be some calls to folks like Tammy Baldwin to say, please support Senator Cantwell, the chair of the Commerce Committee, in holding confirmation hearings to pass out these commissioners. Because if action is not taken, we could, in 2002, actually see a very sort of strange scenario where there's 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat chair for the commission.
In a Democratic administration.
In a
which is
Democratic administration.
Unbelievable.
So, yeah. So watch this space, but it's hopeful what they're doing.
Yeah,
I'm looking at time, and we should probably talk about the Maine.
Yeah,
law.
let's talk about Maine. So Maine's a good news story. In 2018, I believe, Maine passed legislation relating to PEG. Maine passed legislation relating to PEG. And they got bipartisan support to do it. How in the heck did they do that?
Well, they
right?
did- well,
How
they-
in the heck did they do that?
Well, you'll share some of their secret
Yes,
sauce.
I will.
But Maine is a mostly rural state.
Yes.
Maine is a state with a lot of small towns, Maine is a state with a lot of small towns that don't have in-house attorneys.
Yes.
Right? So negotiating with corporations has been difficult for them. And so they saw state...
And their main cable provider is?
Charter.
Charter, yes. Okay, that sounds familiar. All that kind of sounds familiar to Wisconsin, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Except for Wisconsin has a couple bigger cities.
Yeah.
But
And we don't have local franchises.
But importantly, Maine adopted a model franchise probably 15 years ago because of the fact that most of the small communities don't have legal departments. So Maine had actually codified a model franchise that they used. So it's not quite a state franchising model, but they did want to encourage localities to adopt a state model to be able to band together, if you will.
this will shock you, but Charter doesn't sign that one. So
Yeah.
Okay, so the Maine law is fantastic, right? It requires channel placement back where the peg channels used to be, at the lower levels. It requires inclusion on the programming guide. It requires the channels be provided in HD if you send them an HD signal. So these are all great things that I think maybe all of you would want, right? As far as our channels being provided over a cable system. They also had a build-out section in the law, and I personally think this is part of the genius of the law because it got I think it brought in more bipartisan support for getting more build-out to rural areas. So I think that's part of the secret sauce is how did they loop in legislators to get bipartisan support on that. It's more complex than that, but I think that's part of it.
Yeah, so it's a line extension requirement, 15 homes per mile. That's actually a very good requirement, even for states that have, I think, stronger laws generally. I know in Maryland, there's only one county that has this. And, and Maryland's a pretty densely populated state, but there's only one county that has that requirement. So, Maryland's like perked up their ears and like, well, we want that too, right?
Right, that's the lowest I've seen anywhere.
Yeah.
Lowest density,
Yeah,
which is
I
great.
don't think Wisconsin would get away with that because of AT&T. AT&T does not have to serve whole communities at all, and neither do the legacy cable companies.
Well, I think that I guess the message that we want to send to you is that Maine Republicans like actually being served by companies, much as Maine Democrats do. And the question here in a mostly rural state is whether or not the companies actually show up and provide service, or they just provide lip service to what their obligations are. So this is not a channel law. This is a law about consumer rights. I think that's the other focus that's extremely important to thinking about this. If a consumer in Maine pays for being on a system or being on or having channels, this is like a consumer requirement, as opposed to the municipality's rights, right? So I think that focus was extremely powerful in terms of the legal challenges that occurred on this law. It's been upheld now by both the district court as well as the Court of Appeals in Massachusetts because of the regulatory powers that the localities have in terms of consumer protection, right? So NCTA fought this law pretty hard, and they failed on all counts.
Yeah, they failed at the legislature, they failed at the U.S. District Court, and they failed at the Court of Appeals.
Thanks. I appreciate you
victory.
asking us to make a presentation, Mary.
And
so it's nice. I appreciate. We don't need to get in an argument. We're telling you we're giving you facts about what's happening in another state. So so if we've got a limited amount of time, so I appreciate your commentary.
Yes.
So how did Maine do it, Mike?
Yes. Well, they put in just a ton of hard work. Number one, I was talking to Randy Visser, and who was one of the
vendors here with
vendors.
Cablecast. He lives in Maine. Yeah.
And he was part of the legislative effort. So I was talking to him for quite a while yesterday. but they built up over time a strong advocacy group. So it's not just one or two people. I mean, this is a big group that is is showing how important PEG is at all levels, to all levels of government. So starting with your town or city, and then going up to the state. They built up incredible networking. They worked with the governor's office. They worked with the attorney general's office. It helped that charter was extremely unpopular in the state of Maine. I'm not sure that charter is a lot more popular here. Maybe it is. I don't think it is, but maybe it is. And like the bolded item is, they got bipartisan support. They figured out a way to get bipartisan support, and so that, to me, is the challenge for any state looking at this. Not just
Right.
Wisconsin, by the way. It's every state. How do you get bipartisan support? And that's going to be different, I would suggest, by state. You have to figure out what's going to work in your state to get both Democrats and Republicans to support legislation.
So for example, the law itself was promulgated by charter, basically moving all the channels to the 1300s in Maine, and the folks in Maine actually reached out to charter PEG operations in Hawaii, which faced a similar issue in 2017, and the Hawaiian operations actually had beat back charter to actually move their channels back and get a guarantee for the next 15 years to be in their positions. It's a political effort, bipartisan effort. And I think one of the sort of the wisdom of Maine, frankly, is you have a lot of these sort of small towns where you've got Republicans who depend upon the services that are being provided by the local channels. And they ended up showing up and testifying in many instances, or vouching for organizations as they were trying to reach out to legislators.
Yeah, and they also had a former Time Warner executive come over to the municipal side and just hammer home the message that this law needed to get passed. So what I did about 2 months ago is I reached out to Maine and their municipal advocates, and I was like, this law is so good and you're having such success in court, how in the world did you do it? And so he gave me this list that I've kind of pared down into these slides, and we'll just share them with you now, and just know that WCM is already doing a lot of this, okay, on your behalf. But it was interesting to hear, their perspective on what really helped to make their efforts successful. And so the first one is they created email lists, which seems kind of basic, but it's also kind of genius, right? Because you need to be able to get information out very quickly to your municipal advocates, people that are going to have conversations with legislators, and shooting out strategic emails, at the right time, not overwhelming people with information, but getting information at the right times to the right people is critical. And so they had email lists for city managers. They had an email list for legislators, and that was huge. Now they also suggested keeping the municipal attorneys in the loop. That's helpful because, we're talking to people too. And all of that can help. We talked about nonprofits using PEG stations just this morning. And they can be incredible resources when it comes to testifying at the Capitol. And so they had those lists. And they had key people that they could call on to come to the Capitol and testify, and to show the relevance of PEG today, which is super important in my view.
Who coordinated all this effort? We keep saying they and Maine.
Community Television Association of Maine is our affiliate in Maine.
Okay.
There's about 60 PEG organizations in Maine. They're mostly township run. There are probably 4 or 5 nonprofit associations that operate in places like Portland.
So essentially
and
the counterpart of WC.
the counterpart of WCM. They've got a very active former city employee from South Portland by the name of Tony Vigue that many of you may have met. Tony is retired now. So he needed a hobby, and it was helping his communities in Maine.
And this
Right?
advice from Maine
Right.
is from Tony.
Right. I mean, and Tony is sort of regular on the national circuit with ACM, so he shows up on our public policy calls and basically trades notes and ideas with other folks around the country on this stuff. So, but like CTAM, none of the organizations in CTAM is big. I mean, they're like, they're like one-person township organizations, or they're, $100,000 nonprofits serving small towns across the state.
Yeah, I think the biggest city in Maine is Portland, Maine.
Right.
And that's only about maybe 70,000
people. 80,000 people.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Portland Media Center there has got maybe 6 staff members. It's like the largest organization.
All right, let's get through our list now, okay?
Yep.
So, advice from Maine, be involved with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities and other like groups. So, I'm from Minnesota. Nothing's going to get passed that's going to really benefit local government unless the League of Minnesota Cities supports it, right? And not only that, you need to not only have their support, you need to get it to be a priority for passage. So it's key to be affiliate or working very, very closely with your other municipal organizations within your state. The third one is building a relationship with the governor's office. And I would just suggest to you that it needs to be no matter what party is in the governor's office, okay? You're going to have Democrats and you're going to have Republicans. You need to have a relationship with who's ever in office at that time and always maintain some sort of connection there. Let's see. Creating a legislative subcommittee, I think we do that for sure here, and we've been developing legislation here in Wisconsin. And then I think 4 is something that probably all of you are already doing, right? You're supporting your city and providing information to residents, televising municipal meetings, et cetera. So showing your value, okay. Oh, advice from Mike and Mike. So that was the main advice. Okay. Now I think this part is actually kind of fun. It's developing your story, and we just did this at the MACTA conference in Minnesota, and because just like you, they're looking at funding shortages due to decreases in franchise fees, and kind of the first step to that is, okay, well, how do we show that we're relevant today, right? And the session before this was talking about social media, and there was a lot of topics being covered on streaming. Okay, so you're probably, almost all of you are probably streaming your video in some manner. I would suggest that you have to keep metrics on that. And Javi is here. Javi, raise your hand there. Now he's from CCX Media in Minnesota. I think his organization may do the best job in the country of determining what the metrics are for your viewership. And not only maintaining the metrics, but also reaching out and making sure that content is getting out to people.
Right.
So they'll use they'll use Constant Contact, for example, and they will shoot out emails, and they will ask people to basically click here to sign up to receive all video programming on this topic.
Health, sports, local government.
Yeah.
So that, and so what they've got is basically a segmented list.
Yeah.
That they push out a weekly. They push out basically a weekly.
And
Here's media from CCX on
Yes.
things that you're interested in.
And it grows, and it continues to grow. And so
Yeah.
they can show now, because they've been doing it for a number of years, but I would suggest if you're not doing something like this, do it now, because you're going to be able to show that your growth of viewership is like this, okay? So if somebody says, well, PEG's not relevant, yeah, it is relevant, and here's our numbers. And then you're going to be able to show your relevance in part through viewership, right? In part through other interested parties participating and getting benefit, and that so you're going to be able to show that you deserve to be funded, right? And then what you're also going to be able to show is that your funding's decreasing. So what are we doing, right? So we deserve to be funded. We're relevant. Our funding's decreasing. How do we fix that gap?
And the one other thing I'd say too is that you've got a significant story, and we actually heard some of this from yesterday's session in terms of talking about basically how localities stepped up during COVID. You have a very, very significant story about how your organizations have been providing services that are necessary on a daily basis for the health and for basically the success of your community. Mm-hmm. And like many organizations around the country, you've probably seen your use double in some instances, either in terms of requests for meetings or even sort of the metrics that you see on YouTube and other social media platforms. Actually, we've seen that across the country. Mm-hmm. In the last 18 months, the municipal and local video that's been provided by organizations like yours has basically doubled in use because people need local content that's not being provided by other providers, right? So the necessity for place-based media now is I think more known and recognized than in past years, and I think it will only accelerate as we see more newspapers folding.
Yes.
I mean, not folding, but disappearing. Fold my newspaper every morning, and frankly, your role becomes much more significant in terms of being able to tell the story of locality.
I can't fold my newspaper because my local newspaper disappeared.
Disappearing
during COVID,
yeah,
right? So
right.
it's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
And maybe you're seeing that too. During COVID in particular was hard on print media because advertising disappeared. And
Right.
so a lot of, hyper local, I mean, you might get, Milwaukee still has a paper, Madison still has a paper, Minneapolis, St. Paul still have papers. Barely.
But local businesses.
Local papers
Right.
are gone, by and large. And so who's there to cover local events? Who's left? It's you guys, right? I think that shows your relevance. Viewership statistics show your relevance.
Yeah, and it's
Right.
and the other thing I would say is curious is when you talk to legislators about this in a certain way, they'll recognize that as well,
Mm-hmm.
especially those that have been around a bit. In talking with Senator Baldwin, recently she said something about the fact that when she talks to local media outlets, she's talking to fewer and fewer of them.
Yes.
Right? And that's not a good thing for our democracy. We need more, not less. So. Yeah.
So I think when you're, if you're going to look at legislative fixes in Wisconsin, and this is true in Wisconsin, Minnesota, you need to also identify other partners. So that's going to be municipal partners, but not just municipal partners, right? So you got to figure out who are you going to be able to partner with to bring forth legislation that's going to bring back a broader group that's going to demand some support. So that's a challenge that only you can figure out for each state. And then, figure out what's going to make the legislators tick. You got to be listening, right? What's on their minds when it comes to cable television or communications more broadly? What's making them tick on both sides of the aisle? and it has to be both sides of the aisle to be successful. Listen, react. And prepare for your success.
Yeah.
Let's go, right?
Yeah, and I think I think there's some wisdom to be thinking about trying to build a future for your communities, as opposed to trying to gracefully decline. Jason was using this awful term of geriatric millennials, and you know, and Daniel's got his 50 years of PEG T-shirts, and I don't know that makes PEG a millennial or not, but I don't want to see a graceful decline for that that geriatric millennial. So at any rate, we'll be we're running out of time here, but did you get Mike's information there? I'm going to be around here for the rest of the afternoon. And we want to thank you for the opportunity, and I guess, ask us questions as the day goes on, because we'll be around during the lunch as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.